Good evening. My name is David. I'm an alcoholic. Hi. I'm a member of the Westdale Group. As was said, in Hamilton, we meet on Tuesday nights at 8 o'clock, and we are a medium to large size group, but part of our format involves someone getting up and talking about their experience with sponsorship, which is vitally important to us and has been a huge part of my journey. As well, when the chairperson invites members of the group to raise their hand who is taking the 12 steps and is willing to be a sponsor, on any given night you'll see 20 or 30 hands go up. It's quite impressive and still inspires awe in me each time I'm there. This is my first visit to the ORC, I have to admit. My sobriety date is November the 27th, 2014. And as you may have guessed, I'm not originally from Canada. I'm actually from the UK. This is not a Hamilton accent I'm sporting this evening, especially for the recording. It is, I'm all the way from Oxford in the UK, where the dictionary was written, where words come from. You're welcome. But being here, so far I came in earlier in the day and I've listened to a couple of speakers, and I just came from listening to Tina, and it's just so powerful and inspiring and moving, and has made me question all the things that I was hoping to share with you. So it's kind of thrown it all up in the air, but I'll do my best to share my experience, my strength and hope. The message of Alcoholics Anonymous that was carried to me is that change is possible. And that's what I want to share with you. Change being possible was an idea that seemed beyond anything I could imagine when I first came here. When I first came here, actually everything showed me that I was doomed, that it didn't seem to matter how hard I tried, I always ended up where I began or worse off. My experience was the harder I tried, the closer I tried to get to people, the more I tried to love people and respect people and show up for them in my life, the more distance I seemed to create. I seemed to hurt people, I seemed to let them down, I seemed to embarrass myself. And those were never my intentions. My intentions were to love, to be respectful, to be useful, and I could just never get there by myself. I remember very much when I first drank. It was at a function with, and my family were there, and I remember seeing like all these adults drink, and I liked the effect that it had on them. It kind of made them loose and easy, and I thought, I want to try some of that, and so I drank, and I vaguely remember I was like dancing with people and maybe getting a little bit inappropriately sexy, and I remember my mother the next day saying to me, don't do that ever again. And I said, yes, I know, I'll never do that. And I knew that I would. And when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was qualified to be here. And I think that that's profoundly important. When I came here in the doors, I thought that I was just a product of my experience, like all these things happening to me. I thought it was because I was a middle child. I thought it was because I had been sexually assaulted when I was younger. I thought it was because I had an extremely sexualized childhood right up and into my early teens. I thought it was because I was too loud, too expressive, or maybe I wasn't loud or expressive enough. I thought it was because I was too smart or not smart enough. It didn't seem to matter, though, whatever I settled on, whatever was the reason that I seemed to fail at life. It never fully made sense as to why I kept turning up for alcohol. And what it looks like for someone like me, it looks like I really, really like it. Like it looks like I keep choosing alcohol ahead of my responsibilities, ahead of my family, and ahead of my relationships. And I don't know why I seem to keep making that choice. But when I got here, someone who was armed with the facts about themselves, they talked to me about this physical relationship that someone like me has with alcohol. And we held it up against other things that I really, really liked. And one of the examples I use is chocolate milk. Here in Canada, you guys have very, very good chocolate milk. Congratulations. Much better than we have in England. But I don't drink 20 chocolate milks, and if I got into a run of chocolate milk, like one after the other, and I started to vomit, I wouldn't still be holding a glass of chocolate milk that I would immediately go back to drinking. But I do that with alcohol, and only with alcohol. And that part of that qualification was so important for me to understand that I not only get to be here, that I need to be here. And this physical relationship that I have with alcohol is coupled with this mind that's like a rigged game. And the end result will always be to drink. It's a bit like, I imagine it like a game of Plinko. You know, I drop the chip in the top and it bounces around. Will I, won't I? Where am I going to end up? Whoa, today's going to be a good day. It doesn't seem to matter when it hits the bottom. All of the trays say to drink. And I don't know that that's happening. And so I spent many years trying to explain myself. I'd hear that question a lot, like, what's wrong with you? You know, what's wrong? Sometimes they'd say it nicely, what's wrong with you? But other times, what's wrong with you? And I would try to describe it as best that I could, but it was well before I ever discovered Alcoholics Anonymous, and so I never had that vocabulary. I never had those tools to make sense. So when my mother told me, you know, don't do that again, and I instinctively knew that I would, I don't know why that's happening. As I became a teenager, I started to explore the nightclub life, and it was the 90s. I'd also realized that I was gay, and so I thought, yeah, like there's this whole world out there that I'm going to go out and explore. And so I'd go to the nightclubs in the local city, and I'd travel there wearing a big coat, and underneath I'm wearing a crop top, and it gets shorter and shorter as the months go on, and I'm up there, I'm that guy on the podium with the glow sticks, and you couldn't tell me I wasn't everything. And in the clubs, you know, I'm invited to drink. It was very readily available to me, and so that I drank, and I liked the way that made me feel. It made me feel more like myself. I actually remember several years later actually attending a party. I turned up, I was trying to nail all these drinks on the way so that I could catch up when I got there. And then when I got there, I knocked back another 3 drinks, and I vividly remember announcing to the room, now I feel more like myself. And that was established very early on for me when I drank. And when I'm going to these nightclubs, I'm taking all sorts of making all sorts of dangerous and questionable decisions, and even from my teenage years, I'm waking up the next day in different towns, in different cities, in bed with lots of different people who I would never have looked at otherwise, and I actually find myself quite frightened on many of these occasions. I would remember that sometimes I'd plead with the person to drive me home, and when they would drive me home, usually from a different town or city, once I got somewhere that I could vaguely recognize, I'd tuck and roll out the car, like if they'd stopped at a light or something, and find my way back. I was afraid of being with this person. I didn't understand why I kept doing that to myself, but each weekend would roll around, I'd be back at the club, the crop top would be short, and I'd be back doing exactly the same thing over and over and over. And this whole time I'm living this sort of life, and the other half of my life I'm trying to show up and participate in school and be a good son and be a good pupil, and this kind of like this split down the middle happened, and I struggled to settle down. I struggled to focus. I was very truant from school. I used to just leave and just go off on these like long, ambling, ambiguous walks nowhere. Or my parents would leave and go to work in the morning, and I'd be like all dressed for school, and then I just wouldn't go. And my family have these long stories about how David would be hid under the bed or in the walls or in the wardrobe, or, you know, I would just hide. And I just, desperately trying to claim some sort of space, some sort of freedom. And I had a lot of therapy. That question about what's wrong with you, they started to take that a bit more seriously. And I think therapy and counseling has shown up in my life in various occasions, various situations. And I remember from an early age, I had this idea that if I just talk about my problems enough, like miraculously it will just stop. Like one day I'll just run out of terrible things to say. But that's never the case. My whole view on the world was twisted and skewed, and I don't know that it's self-centeredness or self-centered fear. I remember specifically when I came out to my family, I thought it was going to be this big deal. My parents are very liberal people with several sons, and they were like, "Yay, good for you!" And I was so angry, like I wanted them to like throw me out and cast me out and never darken our door, because I just want so much to matter. I need something to push back against. I need something that makes me feel like I count, and so the easier and more understanding the people in my life got, the more I seemed to struggle, the more things I seemed to be able to articulate that I was mad, sad, or afraid of. When I became a young adult, I moved away from home. I had decided that I was going to train as a professional dancer. That's what I was going to do. This highly disciplined, focused training, this career I was going to undertake. Meanwhile, my whole experience leading up to that is that I am someone who is undisciplined, unfocused, but this was what I was going to do, and this was going to set me on this incredible new path. And so I went to university, and I suffered horribly with homesickness and depression, and I seemed to do a wonderful job of like displacing myself in my own life, and so I just didn't seem to fit anywhere. So now I have all of these like neuroses going on, and I'm like a couple of hours away from home, and I lived in London. I was in the capital city, and I've got a student loan, and I have this relationship. I have this relationship with alcohol that I'm not even aware of. But from that age, alcohol makes me feel better. It not only makes me feel better, it makes me imagine that I can do better. I'd sit and I would drink, and I'd think about how, tomorrow was going to be the day. Based on no prior experience, tomorrow was going to be the day that I would miraculously show up in this new way, this reimagined life I was going to have. And as I spent more time at university trying to get on with my studies and trying to focus and trying to train, that's when I started to notice I didn't drink like other people. I'm running around with dancers, perhaps, who sort of really care about their bodies, and this instrument for their productivity, and that was not my experience. I would wrap up the training as quickly as I could in the day, and I would get to the bar as quickly as I could. And in the UK, they'd ring a bell like about 11 p.m. for last orders at the bar. And I would drink like they were going to ring that bell any minute. Didn't matter what time of the day it was. I lived in fear of that bell. And so, I'm trying to get as many in. I'd go and stand at the bar to order drinks for other people. I'd be drinking while I'm ordering for other people. And I started to get that reputation, like, that's David, like, he's crazy, and that was okay because that gave me something I could explain, why I was the way that I was. And also at that period, my behavior became more dangerous. I started to disappear maybe for longer periods of time with more questionable people. Actually seemed to be sort of the older I got, the less responsible I got. And then I had like money, and so that just kind of exacerbated all of the problems. I started to do really destructive things in my relationships with people, and of course I would wake up the next day and hate myself, but I don't have the vocabulary or the tools to understand what's going on. I'd go to the therapist and talk to them about some of the stuff, and then I'd go to the bar and sit and drink and really think about this session with the therapist I've had and how we're going to turn this around. And then I left university. I found a great excuse, the end of my parents' marriage. I decided to take that personally. It was nothing to do with me. I decided to make it all about me, and so I left university. I abandoned my course, and I went to live on a farm in the middle of nowhere. And I was there for a year on this farm, and it was great. I didn't drink, but also there was no one around, so I didn't have to like interact with people or engage with people. I just kind of got to be, I got to breathe, life on my own terms. I was good with that. And I could only do it for about a year until, I'm supposed to go back and engage with life. I'm supposed to think about what's going to happen next and how am I going to, how am I going to grow into my adulthood. And so when I returned to life, I entered into the next few years of complete frustrated disappointment. In my early adult years, I just couldn't seem to grab onto anything. And I could see all these people around me moving themselves forward, based on ambition or, their drive to succeed. And I could never do it. I was also starting to become one of those angry drunks. I'd turn up at family functions drunk and like swaying around and pointing at people and like wine poured down my face, and I'd start blaming people and trying to hold people accountable perhaps for the things in my life that I was so miserable about. And I have these memories of my brothers kind of like rolling me up like I'm a rolled up carpet and throwing me in the back of the car and driving me away before I did any more damage. And when I drank, that sense of disappointment, that sense of frustration, that fear that my life is going nowhere subsided. When I drank, I felt like I felt when I was back in the clubs, like a goddess. It helped disguise, my sense of self. The truth of what it was that I had no real prospects, and I was likely to screw things up all over again. I was living with my family at the time, and they emigrated to Canada, and they all like sponsored each other so that they could come here and stay, and they left me behind, which was rude, I thought. But also I understand why, because I just kind of like show up. I'm just like this flash of trouble and drama, and my family were only ever really there to put me back together again, financially or emotionally. I really managed to like weaponize honesty. I knew how to say just enough, to kind of get like the sympathy or the pity or the I knew how to cry in just the right way that people would be like, "It's all right, David. It'll be okay. We'll pay that off. We'll pay that off, and you start again tomorrow." I'd be, yeah, that's it. That'll work. So they left and they went to Canada, and I proceeded to try and live between the two countries. So I would do sort of like 6 months in Canada, in Hamilton, and then 6 months back in the UK. That was as long as I was allowed to stay. And I'd always get in trouble, like from the visas and things, because I'd show up and they'd be like, "No, you're not working in Canada, are you?" I'd be like, No, I'm not working in Canada. And then I'd turn up and I'd take jobs in bars and nightclubs, and I started working as a drag queen, and it was all extremely fabulous in the darkness of the nightclub, but really it was quite treacherous and awful. But I would live in Canada for 6 months and go back to the UK, and that idea of displacement, just seemed to grow. This sense of belonging, this sense of connection, just seemed to slip through my fingers. But I did fall in love in Hamilton. I met a boy, in Hamilton introduced me to love, and it also introduced me to drugs. Thanks, Hamilton. And I would say, I don't like to qualify anybody, but I would say that the person I fell in love with would have qualified for a 12-step program. And what that means is that when there was money to drink, oh boy, like it was the most beautiful, like movie romance, we sing to each other and go on these extravagant dates. And then very quickly we'd spill over into fights in the back of the cab and brawls like on rolling across people's front lawns, screaming at each other in the street in the early hours and people calling the cops. And I wasn't allowed to get in trouble with the police. I wasn't supposed to be here that long. And so, and we're in this relationship, and we would have said, how desperately in love that we were. But it was just this battle for supremacy as to, who mattered most, who was having, the worst time, who was the angriest, who was the sadness. I remember one time he came home from, I don't know where he came home from, but we did the whole thing where I threw a full bowl of food at him, and he ducked and it smashed on the wall, and he knelt down on the floor where he was, and he just, and he sobbed. He was just crying, and I walked up and I just spat on him. And I think about that, because if you'd asked me, I loved him. And that was the best I could do. Everything had become so twisted and so warped in my life that was the next right thing. So we kept that up for several years, back and forth, England, Canada, and then the last unfaithfulness, of which there were many, was the straw that broke the camel's back, and I ended up back in England, and he was back in Canada, and I was never, I wasn't going to get that marriage, which was going to get me the visa, and so, I had to cobble together a life for myself. And I moved in with my grandmother as her carer. She had this neuropathy, this illness. She couldn't feel her hands and her feet. She was entirely dependent. She'd have medical carers come in a couple of times a day, but I moved in to stay there and be with her full time, and that suited me. I was just talking to someone recently, jump to the end of my story. The place where I live now, where I've been since 2018, is the first time I've ever had my name on a lease. I've always crashed with people or stayed with people temporarily or couch surf on a long-term basis. So again, this is me, and I'm living with my grandmother, and the family, of which there are many, agree that this is probably a good thing. And anyone who's lived as a carer understands, that it's like this never-ending job that never gets better. It just gets worse. So I'm living as a carer, and as well I'm trying to have this professional dance career, and I've got this idea that if I can just accumulate enough responsibility, that will hold me in line. Magically, I'll start showing up in my life in this incredible, meaningful, and important way. And of course, I just don't. I buckle under the pressure every single time. So I've got this caring position and this dance career I'm trying to launch. I think I'll take a teaching job, not just any teaching job. I'll work my way in as a college and university lecturer. So now I'm responsible for these 16 to 21-year-olds, future professional careers. I have to tell you, I have no qualifications for teaching whatsoever. But I worked my way in there, and off I go. So now I've got this life that just terrifies me. I'm just mortified with myself every day. My living space kind of reflects what's going on. There's just knocked over wine bottles all over these assignments, and there's, baggies and laundry and dirt, and it's just a terrible mess. But I got really good at putting on a bit of a show. Nancy, who was speaking earlier, was talking about the bread bags on the shoes, and that was very much my experience. I was at this point where I knew I needed to drink, and each week I would look at the cash I had, literally coins, and I'd be trying to decide what's the least I can possibly spend on like catching the bus and eating, so that I can still afford to drink in the way that I want to. And so my shoes have got holes in, my shirts don't fit, you'd never know because I'd wear a blazer. And inside my shoes, I wouldn't use bread bags, I would use dog waste bags, clean ones. But they would fit neatly over my socks and not poke out of my shoes, so you wouldn't know that I have to walk everywhere because I can't afford to take the bus, really. And that was me, and I'm painfully aware of that. I remember just these ideas of where I'd look at myself and just think, what are you doing? And it would be fleeting, and then quickly I'd just be on to the next thing, which would always end up with me being at the bar. My grandmother, we got into a bit of a cycle where she'd always seem to drain the battery of my cell phone, call him, she'd always want something. And I would have gone to the bar maybe after doing a bit of teaching, and I'd think, right, I'm going to go home because, she needs someone to kind of prepare her dinner, or she needs someone to turn the light on so she's not sat in the dark. And I'd be sat at the bar, and I'd be looking at the clock and think, okay, I'm going to get the 6 o'clock bus. I'm going to get the 8 o'clock bus home, and then I'll be with her, and then that will be great. And then 8 o'clock would roll by, and I'm still sat there, and I'm still drinking, and I'm not even really talking to anyone. I've probably offended several people by this point, but I'm a bit entrenched in the bar. I'm going to stay. And so it rolls on to 10 o'clock, and I know that the last bus is at 10:30, but don't worry, I got money for a cab. That will be fine. And now I'm thinking about rolling onto the club. But I probably won't go to the club because the money is spent, even the cab money. So now it doesn't seem to matter. I've got to walk home, which is going to take, best part of 2 hours in the early hours of the morning. And this happened on several occasions. And when I would get home, I didn't really used to go to sleep. I just used to kind of like pass out. And then, I think I'm there. And then on one of these particularly like innocuous times, I woke up and my cell phone was on my chest, and there was a message, and it started with, "Don't worry," and it said, "No one's mad at you," but it basically outlined that in the night my grandmother had fallen, and she'd hit her face on a piece of furniture, and of course I wasn't there, and so she had pushed her alarm. And there were 6 paramedics in the house, and they did come and try and wake me up, but they couldn't, and so they took her off to hospital. So I woke up, and that was the first time. That was the first time I thought to myself, maybe there's a problem, and I don't know. I have to say, I don't know how I knew about Alcoholics Anonymous, and so I think, rather embarrassingly, I think it was because of that movie When a Man Loves a Woman with Meg Ryan and Andy Garcia. It's a great movie, check it out. But I took out my phone, as is my privilege these days. What an incredible gift, If you have a website committee in your area, get on it, because you have no idea how many lives that saves. I took out my phone and I Google searched Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was a bit disappointed because there was a meeting that night. So my resolve was tested, but I was going to go, and it was held at the local mental hospital, which was literally like this big Gothic building up on a hill where there's like old dead trees around it, like in the movies. And I knew that I would go, like I knew. And so I went to Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't tell anyone I was going to go. And I don't know what I thought was going to happen. What I thought was going to happen was, I thought we were going to be like, I turn up, we'd be sat in a circle. I know there's always a circle. I don't know what we'd be talking about. And then someone would go, "I'm going to drink." And then everyone would be like, "No, don't." And I thought that's what this was going to be. And all right, okay. But I walked in and I had that experience that many people have, right? Like there were people who were ready to kind of shake their hand and welcome them, and they do like a bit of a thing with their head on the side. Hi, welcome. I don't know if it's supposed to make you like be less kind of intense. They sort of lean back, but I noticed it, and yeah, it was nice. They had the steps and the traditions up on the wall, and I remember looking at step 1 that talked about powerlessness and unmanageability, and I thought, well, that's ridiculous, because, how could this not be my fault? How could this not be just about me, like, getting my stuff together and just kind of like manning up or whatever the phrase was. But I was there and they were talking, and maybe they were reading from a book, or maybe they weren't. And I kept going back. I kept going back to Alcoholics Anonymous. It was really nice. They made me turn off my phone. They were quite stern about that. It wasn't like silence. It was like turn it off. And that was great, because like the rest of the world just went away, for that 1 hour. Even if I didn't fully grasp what was being talked about or what was being read, for that 1 hour, like just this repetitive kind of boring 1 hour kept showing up in my life. But it offered me a space where I could catch my breath. My mind, my brain it's like the Jerry Springer audience. Like it is just like so raucous, loud, and it's chanting. And you imagine you got the editor person trying to beep out all the swear words. Like there's a lot going on. So any occasion where I can just kind of, is extremely, extremely powerful. And so I was going to Alcoholics Anonymous, and there was a man, and he kept trying to meet me for coffee, which I thought was very inappropriate, because I was trying to concentrate, and I thought he was trying to pick me up. I didn't realize he was trying to sponsor me. He'd come up to me in a meeting and be like, here's my number. I'd be like, stop it, don't. Get back. That's how you fend them off. And so I was going to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I stopped drinking. I remember that I stopped drinking, and I did start to tell people. I was like, now listen, I'm going to Alcoholics Anonymous. And they were like, oh, thank God, thank goodness. They were so pleased, which was shocking. And but I liked that they were pleased. It had been a while since I felt like people were pleased with me, so that was great. It was a good incentive to keep going. So I kept going, and I remember being at the bar with my friends and being like, this is me, and I'm not drinking, and they were like, oh my God. They're all from North America. Oh my God. And just like a week before, I remember this really clearly, they had up in the bar like one of those big like chalkboards with all the specials written on it, and they suggested I should just clear that off and write sorry on it for all the people that came through, because I was quite problematic. And so I'm now there at the bar, and I'm not drinking. And I remember being at the bar drinking non-alcohol beer. Yeah, and it was, I know that I qualify because all of the rewards of not drinking I got. People were happy, people were nicer to me, I felt better. By that point, I was thinking a lot about this recently. In my drinking, mornings for me just used to be like sat in the bottom of like a shower tray, kind of whimpering, like half throwing up on myself, and, just wondering how the hell I'm ever going to stand up, let alone get dressed and move on. So I'm having all of that experience. I feel better, and I look better, and it was probably only a few weeks. It felt like months, but it was, I think it was a few weeks. But something else happened to me in that time as well. I just stopped drinking, and of course I wasn't doing the program. I wasn't, I didn't have any kind of spiritual practice or any sort of significant change going on. Just this absence. I was in a lot of pain. I didn't know how to ask for help, and the mindset I would be in, because I would be at home, maybe I'd be doing the dishes, and then I would just stop what I was doing, and I'd go and stand at the top of the stairs, and I would I try and fall down the stairs. I will myself to fall down the stairs. I don't know if you've ever tried it. Don't do it. But you'd go and go and go. You try and let your knees go, and they just won't go, you know. But I thought if I just fall down the stairs, I could be hospitalized or sort of hurt, and then people would take care of me. I don't know how to ask for help. I don't know what's wrong with me. You know, there was nothing physical to see wrong with me. So I thought if I just fall down the stairs, I love the bit in Bill's story when he goes, and then I curse myself a weakling, which I did. And then I would stop what I was trying to fall down the stairs, and I would go back down and continue with the washing up. And that happened several times. And I think about that today. I think about like what was going on that made that like, oh, what did you do today? Oh, I did the washing up, tried to fall down the stairs, ended up going to a yoga class. Like, I don't know why that seemed like a logical thing. I didn't obviously didn't tell anyone about that. And I never fell down the stairs. So all of that was going on. I had stopped drinking. I remember telling people I had stopped drinking. And I'm so frustrated to this day. I don't remember deciding not to go back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was nice, like I liked it. There was no defining moment where I was like, that's a load of rubbish, you know, where I just, you know, that decision for someone like me is predetermined. That was a long, like, Plinko game. I tell you what, like that was bouncing around all over the shop. Will he make it? Will he not? But it's determined for me that I will drink again. And so after those few weeks of sobriety, I was right back where I started, if not a little worse off. And there's not much to say about that other than in 2014, I thought I just couldn't do it anymore. And I knew if I could just be with my family, that would be okay. If I could just leave everything in England that was ruining my life and get to Canada, everything would miraculously heal. And I have a memory of being laid on my bedroom floor in the early hours of the morning, and the cell phone is fallen away from me, and there's my friend's voice on the other end going, get up, the cab's coming. And I was in just this state because I was trying to pack like my life into a bag, and because I was going to come to Canada and not look back. And I kissed my grandmother goodbye, and she was asleep, and I left. Yes. I arrived in Canada on July 1st, 2014, and there was a parade, which I thought was for me. Turns out not so much. And I came here with this idea about this new life that I was going to create for myself. I had left the UK, even though I knew the ins and outs of the mess that I had made. I was still somewhat relatively respected and liked and appreciated, and people were very disappointed to see me leave. I arrived in Canada on July 1st, and by the November, I was in an apartment in downtown Hamilton on Herkimer Street, and I'd been prostituting for a period of time so that I could afford to drink and use other substances in the way that I needed to. You know, in removing myself from those things that I was failing horribly at, but still in the removal of those things, I just completely unraveled. I was just completely lost. I free fall into my illness, and so there I am, and I'm not making, you know, huge significant life choices at that point. I'm literally just responding and desperately trying not to hurt anymore. And on the last night, you know, over that day, I remember it wasn't the most I had ever drunk, but it was a lot, and there were lots of other things going on, but I just couldn't get there. I remember I was painfully present for my experience. There were other people I was running with, and I remember I was offended by them. They annoyed me, and I remember that being aware that the apartment I was in, it smelt bad, and the thing that I thought was a bed that I'd been using was actually just a pile of dirty laundry, and it was all painfully clear to me, and the alcohol was not making that go away. It was not making it possible. And I remember as well, we'd gotten into an argument with some people who were supplying stuff, and it all started to get very real and actually really frightening. And I hadn't been frightened like that for a very, very long time. And I sent a text message to my elder brother, who was living in like towards Stony Creek, and he has a nice house and a family and a kid and everything. And he tells the story that he woke up like 5 minutes before this message came in the early hours, and this message the message just said, "Will you help me?" And so he came to find me where I was, and he came to pull me out of that apartment. And I didn't find out till afterwards he brought a weapon with him, because he had no idea what it was that he'd be walking into. And I think about that today, and it was quite significant for me in the amends process. You know, I have this idea about what the experience was of the people around me, but in truth, I don't know how they talked about what was going on. I don't know how they settled that. The way that I would show up in their lives, you know, I would call them. And just backtracking a little, I remember I would call them from England in the early hours of the morning, hysterical, just hysterically depressed and drunk, to the point where I can barely hold my head up. And I probably would have been like just sat trying to watch TV through one eye. And then what would have happened is like an Adopt a Dog commercial would have come on with Sarah McLachlan singing in the background. And that would just be it. Like it would just like open up. And so I would call Canada to tell my mom. I know what I would tell her, but I would just call her. And of course, with the time difference, they're just sat down to have dinner, you know, and they get this message, this incoherent wailing. And I would always, you know, try and call them back the next day and be like, I must have taken anti-allergy medication and drank on it. You know, don't worry about it. I'm just tired. So my brother, he dropped me off at my mom's house, and I staggered inside, and it amuses me. When I had been pulled out of that, I was in various states of dress between man and woman, let me tell you. And so I actually had one shoe off and one shoe on, so I was doing that walk, like you know the walk I mean. And so and I went in and I sat down on the end of my mother's bed in the early hours of the morning, and I told her just enough. I told her enough so that I couldn't, like, the next day I couldn't be like, I don't know what that was about, don't worry about it, I'm good. I laid it out enough, and I have this memory of like walking down the hall from her room once I had like offloaded all this stuff to go to find somewhere to sleep. And I remember drinking this Budweiser that I had in my pocket, and I think I knew that was going to be the last drink. But I woke up the next day and they'd called a family meeting. And they were all there, which is wonderful, but some of them I didn't know very well because they were like my brother and their partners, and they were all there, and they were just like, you know, we love you, we got you, what do you need? And I just, like, I cried, and I cried a lot. And they thought that I was crying because I was sorry. But I was crying because I didn't know what not drinking looked like. I couldn't imagine that, like, evening or the next day, or what about like the weekend, and it was November, so what about Christmas? Like all of this stuff, like just the thought of it completely reduced me to tears. I had no idea what it was that I was going to do, but I did know that there was Alcoholics Anonymous. Dramatic pause. And so I took out my phone. Google searched Alcoholics Anonymous, and much to my dismay, there was a meeting that night. It was at the Delta United Church in downtown Hamilton, a meeting called Changing Ways. It's no longer there. It was a speaker meeting. I remember that. And I walked in to this meeting, and there were the same steps and same traditions, thousands of miles, you know, difference, same steps, same traditions, same people doing that, you know, with the little look and the welcome, and I sat down, and it was just familiar enough that I could catch my breath. Just for a minute, I knew what was going to happen in that 60 minutes. And that was so, so important to someone like me. I felt like I was completely free-falling in life. I was so frightened about the future. But I had these meetings, and so the next day I went back and I went to the social club in Hamilton. We're very lucky. It has multiple meetings every day. And so I went there, and very, very quickly, within the one or two meetings, there was a woman there. And she grabbed me afterwards and she said, I think I've listened to you a little bit and I think I can help you. And I would have done anything. So I was like, yeah, for sure. And so we arranged to meet at her apartment. And we were there for 13 hours with the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I remember I still have that book. You open the cover and it says like Alcoholics Anonymous in big letters. And she made me write, brings me to a personal relationship with the God of my understanding. I had no idea what that meant. It was the first time I was going to be sitting down and reading this book. And 13 hours later, I left her apartment with the instruction for step 4. And I don't know how I got there. If you had asked me at any other time, this idea around spirituality and higher powers, I just would have said, not for me. I'm coming at this as an LGBTQ plus person. Like this is not the vibe that I'm going for. But there was absolutely no resistance on my part. When the propositions were put forward, yes, absolutely. And I don't know what it was that I was moving towards. All I had to know was what I was leaving behind. All I knew was that I couldn't go back, and recovery for someone like me needed to be so much more than just waiting. That this wasn't going to be about just the removal of alcohol. I've already tried that. It doesn't work. It has to be about moving towards something else. It has to be about gaining and growing. And so we were sat and we were going through this book, and all this stuff is jumping off the page to me. And it was an amazing, amazing experience. I left there with the instruction for step 4 and launched through the rest of the work. At around 10 or 12 weeks of sobriety, I'd begun looking to help others, and I was turning up to there were meetings over Christmas and all of this stuff, and it was so profound. I remember seeing people I remember seeing people who would be explaining the troubles in their life with one breath, and then asking the person next to them, how can I help you? And my whole life, people have been saying to me, David, get over yourself. And I had no idea, how to do that. There wasn't a step ladder for someone like me. And I could see these people literally getting over themselves. And it completely blew my mind. I actually ran home one evening and jumped in front of the television. I was like, God, it's real. And they were down in front. But it was beautiful. I literally wanted to run. I wanted to be like a Dickens character, running up and down the street with a bell. And then I was rolling with some AAers, and there was some people that they helped out with winter clothing. It was just the most amazing thing I'd ever been witness to. I didn't have anything to contribute, but I was just sat in the back of the car, just amazed at all of this. And then I went home, and I was in the kitchen, and I thought at first I was having a heart attack. I was hot and excited and frightened and shaking, and there was just this sense that this was it, that this was the kind of man I could get to be, that I was on this path, and I just had to stay here. And I also knew, I knew that everything was going to be okay. And I realized in that moment that my whole life, all I had wanted was someone to tell me that everything was going to be okay, and for me to believe it. I'd never believed it before in that way. From there, the last 8 years have been one of existential growth in my life. My understanding of what it means to be a man and a brother have been profoundly altered and changed as a result of this program. Back in the early days, someone in Alcoholics Anonymous, they gave me a bike and someone else gave me a backpack. And I didn't have a job or anything like that. And someone said to me, "This is your job." And so I would go to the meetings all the time and I would put stuff in my backpack and take it to the men at the detox. And there were lots of rules. You could take socks, but don't take a certain type of deodorant because they'd eat it or something. I wasn't sure. But I would go and I had like the books and I was sponsoring people. And I remember they would call me and I'd have all the books laid out, like As Bill Sees It, Daily Reflections, big book, 12 of them. I'd be like, "Go, what's your problem?" Like I just desperately knew that this was the path I needed to be on. I took a position at the central office. I got my home group. I took a position with my group. I conducted myself like I was intending to stay. And that was profound in itself. Every time, the people in Alcoholics Anonymous say my name, like it moves me. It reminds me that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. In Alcoholics Anonymous, I've been married in 2020, still married. I said it like past tense. I'm still married. I was married in 2020, and I show up in that relationship as a man of integrity and dignity and faithfulness. If this is all I ever get to have, if my life were to end tomorrow, I can tell you that I have been able to show up in my life in a way that I would want to be remembered. And you have given that to me. I came here to just not drink and to try and be okay with it. And you've completely changed me inside and out. I show up in my life today in a way that my mother is so grateful to Alcoholics Anonymous, and my brothers, they also carry a message to their friends and people they know because they've seen this change take place in someone like me. If you're struggling in Alcoholics Anonymous, if you're desperately trying to, find the willingness to stay, then you have to reach out. You have to know that you can't do this by yourself. I will finish with this. I just recently went on my first vacation. I've never been on vacation before. And on the last day, I was stood there on the balcony and they'd taken the cases out. And there's this line in Bill's story where he says, "I realized for the first time that of myself I was nothing. Without him I was lost." And when I first read that, I thought, how dreadful. What a terrible way to feel about your life, to be nothing. And I realized in that moment that of myself I am nothing. And without you and without a power greater than myself, I am absolutely lost. If you're here for your first meeting or your 1000th meeting, if you're here for the weekend or just for tonight, please hear me when I say that change is possible. Alcoholics Anonymous, I will spend my life trying to make up for you the incredible gifts that you've given to me. I'm going to be here for the rest of the weekend and catch all the other speakers and soak up the conference and just allow myself to be here and remember all of the incredible, magical moments that allow me to be here speaking to you. Thank you so much for having me speak.